I'm always criticizing myself as far as the expectations people may have on me.
Mm-hmm.
That really shouldn't matter.
So you're judging yourself that you're not doing enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a practice you can get into called self-inquiry. It was a practice developed by one of the famous Indian sages named Ramana Maharshi. And he basically came up with, his realization was, when I question my thoughts, I don't suffer. But when I don't question my thoughts, I do suffer. So the first question to look within yourself and inquire about would be, who's thinking this thought? Who keeps thinking this thought? And you can ask yourself then, can I identify the moment that I consciously chose to pressure myself to think this thought that I'm not doing enough? Like, yeah, it'd be really fun to think about that I'm not doing enough right now. Ping! Can you isolate that moment? And if you can't, then you can verify with your own direct experience, this thought is coming from ego. It's coming from the automatic self, right? It's coming from that reflexive mechanism that never shuts up. And when we are unconscious that it's doing that, we become that voice. We cannot differentiate who I am from this voice in my head. So that creates suffering. So when we don't question the mind, we suffer. When we take a step back and observe the mind, which is what meditation is, then we develop a subject-object relationship. So that means we're no longer completely entangled with that thought. There's a little bit of space we just created. And that space allows us to observe, am I the thinker? Am I really the thinker? The answer is obviously no. Who would consciously choose to suffer, right? If it was up to you, you'd feel good all the time. So find the thinker of the thought. The next question to ask is, who would I be without this thought? What would my life look like if I didn't keep thinking this thought? If I didn't keep judging myself in this area, how would my life be? If the answer is better, then you're not the one who is suffering from this thought. Step 3 is find the sufferer of the thought. Who's really suffering from the thought? How can this be the problem if when I remove the thought, I'm not doing enough, I don't suffer? What is that? Oh, okay. Like something's about to blow up. So does that make sense to everyone? If I'm not thinking this thought, I don't suffer. So how can the actual thing that I'm thinking about be the problem? The thought is the problem. Yeah? If you don't think the thought, I'm not doing enough, will you sit on the couch and do nothing? Of course not. Right? You love what you do. You love working. You love accomplishing goals and stuff. So you don't need that thought to do something. The thought just pretends to be necessary. But it's really just the ego's fish hook that it keeps to reel you back in. It needs to have authority over you, which means it needs you to believe, it needs you to buy what it's selling. The moment you stop buying what the mind is selling, you are free. You cannot suffer. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. So if you release your self-judgment, if you take up the practice of loving every part of yourself as equally valid, then your heart opens. And an open heart cannot suffer. Only a closed heart can suffer. When I went through this kind of awakening process, what happens is these kinds of thoughts become less and less tolerable, right? Like this thought for you is becoming more and more insufferable for you. You're like, God, this is driving me crazy. I hate that I'm always thinking this thought, which means that the true self is waking up to itself and going, I'm not comfortable with this identity any longer. It's wearying to me. It's exhausting to me. I want to be free, which means you're waking up. So even if I would be like in the lunch line at Google, and someone steps in front of me or bumps into me, and I go, selfish, whatever. I started to realize, every time I do that, I'm the one who suffers. That person didn't even know how I felt. Every time I close my heart, I'm the one who suffers. So you start to realize it's never to my benefit to close my heart to anyone or anything. The moment I create a judgment, I've created a problem that doesn't actually exist. You know, that's what the world of the ego is. It is nothing. It is meaningless. It doesn't exist. It's only an illusion in your mind. Nobody else knows about your problems. So how do they actually exist then? Who do they exist for? Just for the mind. So the mind is the one suffering. When you question that thought, then you can observe, oh wow, this negative emotion is here, trying to get some attention. It's doing its best audition. I don't really want to feel that. So I'm going to stay as the witness of that. I'm going to keep that in my conscious awareness. Because if I slip unconscious again, I'll go back into that thought and suffer again. And all of these thoughts are forms of judgment in some way. That's the only thing the world of the ego is. It is perpetuating guilt in your mind. You're guilty for something. You're not doing enough. Yes, Derby.
Sometimes I feel like those thoughts can be also like call to actions, like they may have some truth to it, but I think it's more about like separating the emotion of guilt from like, okay, how do I observe this thought neutrally? Because if you just completely ignore the thought, you'll never grow in life. So what is like, I guess, how do you do that?
The concept we just talked about, the thought pretends to be necessary, that's what the thought of I need to do something is. That thought is completely useless. Do you think you have no concept of what work is without that thought? Of course not. The thought is pressure, the thought is guilt, the thought is bite on this fish hook, Bruce. This is how the ego maintains influence over us. When you said, I need to do something, right? Or whatever your example was, that's just called intuition. That's natural. That's the true self. That's how you know what to do. And then the mind comes in and comments on that intuition and says, let me narrate this for you. If you don't do it, then your family will hate you and your friends will leave you and whatever. And then it blah, 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 blah. So you don't need the blah, blah, blah. You just need the intuition, which is what you are. That takes no effort. And actually, when you stop thinking, you get more connected with that presence because everything is present, everything is now. And it feels as if you're not even doing anything. You sort of enter this effortless state of being where you don't have to plan or strategize for anything. You can walk into every moment with an open heart, and somehow the words to say, the actions to take are all arising spontaneously within this field of presence. And then the second the mind says something about it, it starts to split the present moment into pieces. This is okay, this is not okay. That takes you out of presence and into chaos again, into a form of insanity. Does that make sense? So you're absolutely right. You need to know what to do, but you already do know what to do. The mind actually doesn't know what to do. That's why it's constantly jibber-jabbering to get your attention. So just be in that effortless presence. The part of you that is not trying to form any conclusions about this moment.